if you want to achieve in this life, you need to set your goals higher.
Already pretty high.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Voluntary Hippie Radio, where we explore the philosophies of self-ownership and non-aggression from a counterculture perspective. This is JG Vibes on Wednesday, October 3rd, and tonight I will be playing the audio premiere of my new book, Finding Freedom in an Age of Confusion. This book is free in PDF and audio download at aotmr.com. And if I could find out the technical stuff, I think I might be able to get this onto Kindle for free, but I'm kind of technologically retarded, so if anyone out there might know what you're doing with this kind of stuff and you'd like to help, shoot me an email at jgvibes@aotmr.com and you could help me out. I'd greatly appreciate it. So anyway, this book is a collection of my most positive and optimistic writings, because I really do get a lot of good feedback on some of my positive but still real material. I never sugarcoat anything or pull any punches, everyone knows that, but at the same time I have an immense amount of confidence in the ability of the human species to change their direction in the face of difficult times. To give you a better idea of what to expect, I'll read the description that will be on the back of the book if this ever should get printed, which who knows, maybe it will, maybe it won't. We'll have to see what the marketplace of ideas demands. So here it is. Alchemy of the modern Renaissance ended on a positive note. But since then, I have observed even more signs that peace, love, and freedom will eventually overcome the paradigm of oppression that we are currently experiencing. If you are even thinking about reading this book, then it is quite possible that you have found yourself on the rewarding but difficult path of peaceful rebellion. Along with the millions of others worldwide who are beginning to find their purpose, you have the ability to change the world for the better in your lifetime, no matter what kind of situation you come from or where you call home. The endless list of insane laws that have been passed recently, coupled with the many other atrocities carried out by the governments of the world, make things look extremely bleak, but these are all signs of a dark age that is coming to its inevitable end. These signs have manifested themselves in some very upsetting and damaging ways, but these tragedies are temporary and will mark the end of a long era of violence and confusion. How difficult this transition is, and what the end result will be, is not yet determined, though. That all depends on us as individuals. So I'm really looking forward to premiering that on the show tonight. I'm going to play that the whole second hour I'm going to be playing that clip. So here in the first hour, I'm going to go over some news and announcements, and I'm also going to play a clip that I wanted to play last week, but just didn't get the chance to. I made a short appearance on the Bob Tuskin show, and we had an interesting chat, where a few good points were brought up, so I'll play that towards the end of the first hour. You may have noticed that I've been doing a lot more articles recently for the website, and that we are now at about 80% original content at aotmr.com. Some of it is republished from work that I have been recently doing for the intelhub.com and all of the guys over there. It was actually Bob Tuskin of the Intel Hub who gave me the push that I needed in the direction to start doing more current news articles. And that's been working out really well, so you can expect more original content and more current articles. And for those of you that enjoyed the deeper philosophical articles that I used to put out, well, they can kind of be found in these new free ebooks that I'll be putting out. So I want them to be compiled in a more organized fashion anyway, instead of just putting out an article every now and then. now have everyday current news articles and philosophy ebooks. And I think that's going to be the format that I'm going to go with. So if there's any suggestions on that end, if you agree, disagree, feel free to contact me and let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to look into the Free Your Mind conference. That's the only real event I got to talk about today, and I'm going to be talking about that every week. The flyer is linked up on our website, and you can find them at freeyourmindconference.com. That's freeyourmindconference.com. As I said, I'm going to be mentioning this every week because I really support what these people are doing. I really support the speakers on this event, and this will without a doubt be one of the best events of this kind on the East Coast. So this will be something that is well worth traveling to. And even if you don't live in the area, you could try to meet up with people and carpool and get out there. I have been so caught up with promoting for that, though, that I really haven't been able to keep up with anything else. I've been promoting for some underground parties that I have going on with the rave stuff, but as far as activist events goes, right now Free Your Mind Conference is the only thing that's really on my radar. So if you guys know of anything in your area or anything that one of your favorite speakers is going to or going to be at, let me know and I'll get that up on the website and I'll talk about it on the show, because it's good that we all talk about what's going on in the community, whether we're involved with the events or not. We should all be kind of helping each other out. So if you hit me up, email me, let me know what events are going on in your area, and then I'll be able to inform everybody else. So those of you that have followed me through my event production company and through the website and all my previous work through all those avenues will know that friendly cross-promotion is something that is a big part of what I do. I have a page on my site that was once dedicated to other rave events in the area, but it really fell into disrepair as I ran out of time and started juggling so many projects. All of the events are way old, passed a long time ago, but there's a description on the page that kind of gives a little bit of my philosophy on this, and I'll read it real quick. It says, are you an artist, musician, or promoter that has an upcoming event that you would like us to promote for? Just send us an email and your event will be added to our promo calendar. We believe in the process of co-opetition, where everyone can achieve their own goals and meet their own needs while still respecting the needs and goals of others. So please share your event with us, even if it's out of town, the same night as one of our shows, or even if we've had disagreements in the past. It doesn't matter. We want everyone's work to be represented. So that's really what I'm all about, especially with this kind of work, with this kind of activist work. We should still all be sticking together, even if we disagree on some minor issues, or really even if we disagree on some major issues, as I will talk about in the ebook later. I will kind of touch on this subject about unity in the activist community. So I want to carry this same philosophy with me into the activist realm of cross-promotion and just do my best to get the word out about everything and everyone that I find to be awesome. So one of the most awesome things that I have been seeing in the news recently, and something that I've been writing a lot about, is jury nullification. Process by which jurors in criminal cases can rule in favor of the defendant if they are guilty of breaking unjust laws. This has happened just a few weeks ago in New Hampshire, where a Rastafarian who was charged with cultivating marijuana got off the hook because the jury thought that it would be unjust to lock him up for a nonviolent crime. This is seriously incredible stuff. And then it happened again just this week with a farmer who ran a co-op that sold raw milk. Some of you may remember this guy. He got his farm raided, I think it was a couple times over the past 2 years. And they raided his farm, they raided his van, they destroyed food, all sorts of crazy nonsense. So Anyway, you could find out all his information at the article on AOTMR.com. It's titled Co-op Farmer Acquitted Through Jury Nullification. And basically a jury decided not to prosecute him for his crime either. They didn't believe it was a crime. And of course, immediately the mainstream media is saying that this verdict is the result of a lack of evidence. But that's absolutely ridiculous, because the farmer admits to all the charges against him because he doesn't believe that they're crimes. So that's all the evidence you need right there is a confession. He says, yeah, I sold milk to my neighbors. There you go. That's your evidence. But the jury decided to nullify it because they didn't agree with the law, and the mainstream media won't even mention it because this is such powerful stuff, and it needs to become a mainstream phenomenon. Everyone needs to know about this process of jury nullification. So tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, repost articles about this, inform people about jury nullification, because this is one of our last powers that we actually have in the legal system. Also, another thing that I wanted to talk about relating to this legal system is the freeman movement, or free man on the land movement. I kind of really hate that term because it's so gender specific. We definitely need more gender neutral words and stuff like that, because of course women can do this too. It's basically the idea, and I'll actually just read the article that I wrote yesterday, because that kind of explains my thoughts on it and kind of explains what it is. So I'll get into it right here. This is also at AOTMR.com. Judge John Rourke, the Associate Chief Justice of the Court of Queen's Bench in Canada, has threatened to destroy the free man on the land movement after being challenged and becoming frustrated in local cases. In a newly released court decision, John Rourke analyzes the movement, which he refers to as Organized Pseudo-Legal Commercial Argument, or OPCA litigants. His 185-page analysis of their arguments was posted on the Alberta Justice Court website on Thursday. This same judge was in the news not too long ago when he called a rape victim stupid during the sentencing of the man who raped her. He then went ahead and only sentenced the rapist to 3.5 years in prison. So this guy's absolutely crazy, which most judges are, of course. So let's get back into the article. The free man on the land movement consists of a growing number of people who are beginning to turn the rhetoric and the legalese of the state against itself. According to the nationalistic folklore put forward by the courts, people are only ruled because they consent to being ruled. So there's a lot of these people out there who are withdrawing their consent from the system. And as much of a great concept of this is, and as much as everyone should be encouraged to pursue this lifestyle, there is one fatal flaw in this approach that must be remembered, and that flaw is that the whole system is a fraud to begin with, and the system will bend to the whims of authority regardless of what has been written into law previously. It is this flaw that may begin to cause complications for those in Canada who have declared their independence. In the document released this week, the judge said that these persons employ a collection of techniques and arguments promoted and sold by gurus to disrupt court operations and to attempt to frustrate the legal rights of governments, corporations, and individuals. The persons who advance these schemes, and particularly those who market and sell these concepts as commercial products, are parasites that must be stopped. Now, I kind of sum it up quite well in the next part of the article, in my response to that. I say it is unbelievably ironic for a judge to say that an individual who claims sovereignty over themselves is a parasite, when that is the very essence of a bureaucrat's existence. The judge has also accused those people of clogging up the system with paperwork and court dates. However, they are merely following the legal code to a T, without taking all the deals and settlements that have been put into place to keep up with the incredible volume of cases that are coming through the system. It is still too soon to tell how the ruling will affect legal cases for those who have claimed their independence, but due to the legal system's subjective concept of law, it is highly possible that the law will be restructured to favor those in authority. Now, I think that what these people do, and I mean, hey, I might even file these kind of papers someday when I get around to it, to be a sovereign citizen, as they're called. More often in America they're called sovereign citizens, and I believe in Canada the name is more free man on the land. But I totally agree with using the court system against itself. However, I also understand that if I get into a courtroom with an authoritarian psychopath, he can just rewrite the law as this guy did. And their system is not something that is legitimate. It's not something that plays by the rules. So if the system played by the rules all the time, then the sovereign citizen deal would be great. You'd be completely invincible. But it's not that way. The system doesn't play by the rules, and they're not going to play with the rules with people like this. So I highly suggest and support this kind of lifestyle, and as I said, I might even pursue this kind of lifestyle myself. But it is important to know that this legal paperwork is not what makes you free. It is your own freedom as an individual. You're already free even if you don't file for some kind of sovereign citizen paperwork and reject your connection with all of the licenses and all of those things. So I think that this is just a really important story because it brings up an important topic, and it lets us know that when we try to use the system, that it is rigged against us in many ways. And if it isn't, if we find ways around it, then they're going to rig it again, and they're going to rig it again. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep on trying to underthrow it and hit it with everything we got. And I'm sure that all those sovereign citizens out there are going to plow through this 185-page document, and they're going to have a million more ways that they can buck the system, and that's great, and they should keep on doing it. And, you know, I'm sorry that I am not that well versed in legalese, and I'm so afraid of courtrooms that I'm not even playing that game. But hey, there's people out there that want to do it, and if they want to do it, that's great. I totally commend that. And I'm going to cover one more story from the week that was up at AOTMR.com, but there was actually a ton of different stories. I'm just kind of like, for some reason, the legal stuff is the interesting stuff this week, so that's kind of what I'm covering. It's usually not that way, but that just kind of happens to be the deal this week. The other thing that I wanted to discuss was 60,000 drug samples compromised in crime lab scandal. And this was this maniac, this chick in Massachusetts, I believe it was. Yeah, Franklin, Massachusetts. She forged her master's degree. She never got a master's degree. She forged one to get this job in a crime lab, and then made every test that she possibly could positive to send people to jail for no reason. Laziness was implicated a little bit. It was said that she would... Let me look for the exact words. It says, Assistant Attorney General John Vernier said Dukin, that was her name, Dukin, later acknowledged to state police that she would sometimes take 15 to 25 samples, and instead of testing them all, she would test only 5 of them, then list them all as positive. She said that sometimes if a sample tested negative, she would take known cocaine from another sample and add it to the negative sample making it test positive for cocaine. So, like, what is this kind of destructive insanity? Putting people behind bars for no reason. And all of this stuff in these cases comes down to these chemists. I remember in my situation, which actually I am asked about in my appearance on the Bob Tuskin show later that I get into, we were hoping that the chemist wouldn't show up in court. We were hoping that they would mess something up, because from time to time they do, and you can get off of a charge because of that. And now it looks like over 1,000 people's charges are going to be affected by this. Most of the people getting off, which is awesome. Even if they're guilty, they should be set free. These drug crimes are completely out of control. Everybody knows how I feel about the drug war, so I'm not going to get into that again. But this lab story is completely out of control. And I would like to see all of these people get off. A lot of the stories that I read said that there's a good chance that all of these people are just going to walk. And they should, like I said. A lot of people in this lab are even starting to resign, so it might be bigger than this chick. Like, who knows? Like, they could be doing these. She could have been following orders. We don't even know, because there's a big fallout from this. A lot of her coworkers are quitting. The lab itself was shut down. So we really don't know what's going on with any of this, but she very well could be completely insane, or maybe she did have a master's degree. Maybe she was their top person, is just taking the blame, like Oliver North style or whatever. So, who knows? But I think it's important that we understand how this case works, how much of a role these chemists play, and how much power they have in these situations. So that was kind of the most interesting stuff that we had this week. So I just wanted to remind everybody that all of the free books I do, all the free media that I do, is made possible by donations, which I'm not really peddling for too much, but if you want to help, it would be greatly appreciated, because I am trying to improve the audio quality here, and I'm trying to do some things with the website and with some video that would really help out. So if you are just a broke-ass hippie like myself, then don't even think about it. Just enjoy the free media. But if you have the means, think about canceling your cable subscription and shooting a little bit of loot to your favorite podcasts. And hey, if it's me, that's great. If it's not me, then just send it to whoever you appreciate the most, you know what I'm saying? So right now I'm going to play that clip that I talked about. This clip is actually from a few weeks ago, but as I said before, I didn't really get to play it on the show last week, and I wanted to make sure that this one didn't fall down the memory hole, you know what I'm saying? So I hope that you enjoy my discussion with Bob Tuskin. And on the other side of this, remember, the whole second hour, and I think it's going to run a little bit over because I think the ebook is like an hour and 5 minutes or something like that. But I'm going to play the ebook in its entirety. This will be the radio premiere, I guess you can say. As always, I am open to your criticisms, suggestions, opinions, anything that you want to say about the work, or even if it's a correction, something that I overlooked. I love reading people's email and hearing what they have to say about my work. So please feel free to express yourself if something irritates you or moves you in a positive way, perhaps too. So here is my discussion with Bob Tuskin, and after that, Finding Freedom in an Age of Confusion. Peace.
Okay, hour number 2 of the Bob Tuskin Show. Thank you for tuning in tonight. It's September 19th, 2012. Hear me coming, boom, boom. JG Vibes is coming on with us in just a moment. His website, aotmr.com. Alchemy of the Modern Renaissance.com. aotmr.com. And I look forward to talking with JG. Let's see if I can speak. I look forward to talking with JG about a number of different things. Well, we'll get his take on Eric Holder's exoneration. JG Vibes is an author and artist with an established record label. So he's in music biz. And an event promotion company that hosts politically charged electronic dance music events. That's interesting. A politically charged electronic dance music event. I'll have to ask him what that looks like. You have the Bob Tuskin Show playing with, techno lights or something. I don't know. What would that look like? Anyways, sometimes I feel like this is a politically charged electronic dance music event. Boom, boom, boom. And if you listen to the show after me on Oracle, you'll hear a lot of that electronic music. Boom, 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 boom. Anyways, you can keep up with him and his new 87-chapter book, Alchemy of the Modern Renaissance, as well as his show, Voluntary Hippie. Voluntary Hippie Radio, that is, at aotmr.com, like I told you. And his email, jgvibes at aotmr.com. His article today, headline reads, Whitewash Investigation Exonerates Eric Holder in Fast and Furious Scandal. And who investigated this case? Yeah, that's right. It was his own department. Yeah. No, that's not a conflict of interest. They had an inner watchdog, a nonpartisan. What was the phrasing of this? They called it let me look up the exact phrasing. It's in his article at theintelhub.com. They call it an internal watchdog. That's right. An internal watchdog found that Eric Holder was just A-okay. He's just fine. He wasn't responsible for the killing of Border Patrol agent. No, he wasn't responsible for the guns being smuggled, being given to the cartel, to the same very people that we're trying to fight against with his beloved war on drugs. Remember, Eric Holder is probably one of the biggest war on drugs goons that I've ever seen. He really is despicable. When we get back, we'll try to liven things up and go beyond that. We'll talk about that a bit with our special guest, the JG Vibes, as promised. And we'll go beyond. We'll talk about some other things, I'm sure, when we get him on the line here after this quick break. It's the Bob Tuskin Show. Of course, if you want to email me, my email is simply bobtuskin@theintelhub.com. AOMTR.com. JG Vibes joins us on the Bob Tuskin Show. What's up, JG?
How you doing, man?
Yeah, same stuff, different day. Well, it was no big surprise to hear Eric Holder was exonerated by his own inner watchdog, right?
Yeah, man, I really wish that I had that luxury to be able to, call you up the next time the cops find me with a gram of pot or something like that, and you could be my judge and jury. How's that sound?
Yeah, I can nullify your case, like the recent New Hampshire.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That was really awesome to hear, wasn't it? That people are actually starting to get up on that jury nullification thing.
Are you a fan of jury nullification? And for those that don't know, by chance, what jury nullification is all about, why don't you explain it?
It's basically the idea, it's technically law, that the jury has the right to really decide the validity of the law. Like, if they don't believe that the law is just, they can rule in favor of the defendant, even if they are technically guilty. So, in most cases, we are told that, when you go into a jury, you're usually told that it doesn't matter how you feel about the law, you just got to rule if it's guilty or innocent based on the facts. And technically, jurors have a lot more power than that, and most judges a lot of times don't even allow defense attorneys to tell even their clients about this.
Yeah, and they arrest people or at least intimidate people who stand in front of the courthouse and try to bring awareness to this. I know there's a longtime activist here in the Orlando area that has been harassed, and that's unfortunate. And I guess you could certainly apply, if you were a jury, your right to nullify the case. Probably wise of people out there to pick and choose their battles. You know that Never Get Busted documentary? Barry Cooper. You know, if you're going to smoke some pot, folks, at least be careful, because whether it's just or not, chances are you're not going to have a jury that understands the fact that you're essentially creating a victimless crime, which is an oxymoron, and the fact that you're not harming anybody, you're using something that's a lot less harmful to even your own health than alcohol is, which is legal. You know the arguments. But no, people are brainwashed still to this day to think that somehow we need a nanny state to tell us what we can and cannot put in our bodies, JG.
Yeah, that's definitely what's going on. And the case, I think it was in New Hampshire that it happened, where the jury actually nullified the case against this guy for growing marijuana. It's definitely rare that it happens like this. A lot of places, people are trying to bring awareness to this, but it's still extremely difficult. And yeah, I wouldn't be out there expecting someone to nullify my case,
Yeah. What is
Eric Holder has that, huh?
Oh, Eric Holder definitely has the ability, because his cronies are the ones responsible for his own supposed investigation. But for those that don't know out there, JG, and you're pretty open about this, what's your case all about?
Basically, I was stopped on my way to work one day, or it was one night actually, and the cop pulled me over because my something was wrong with my registration, because I hadn't gotten my emissions done recently enough, and they just started talking all sorts of nonsense and told me to get out of the car. And I said, "Why am I being detained? What's the deal?" And as soon as I started asking them those key questions, they freaked out, ripped me out the window, and then tried to say that I was resisting arrest. And I mean, I'm still dealing with all that now. I was technically found guilty and put on probation, and I'm dealing with all that nonsense now. But it was the equivalency of a joint that I was caught with.
Yeah, and before they started to bully you, and that's what it is. It's them bullying you, and they don't care about your rights. They're gods. They're in charge, and not all police are like this. But before they even found that gram of pot on you, that very dangerous weapon you had, they were already bullying you, right? They were already anticipating this and treating you as if you were an animal.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, even the very basis of why I got pulled over to begin with was this emissions nonsense. I mean, BP has been destroying the Gulf of Mexico for the past 2 years, and they can just go on and continue to do it, but, the emissions coming out of my tiny car, or even if I drove around a gas-guzzling SUV, it wouldn't even compare to the kind of nonsense that goes on in the military and corporate level as far as pollution is concerned. So the fact that some guy could even stop me and basically pull a gun on me and rip me out my window because he's wearing a costume, and I haven't pretended to, whatever I have to do for them recently, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and unfortunately you have to pick and choose your battles, though, because, the best thing you could have done is just deal with it, unfortunately. And when you deal with it, you're basically consenting to the fact that they rule over you, and that sucks. It really sucks.
Oh yeah, it does. And I mean, in a lot of ways, to like survive, you gotta. I mean, I would have actually paid for the emissions and done that, whatever, if I had known about it. But they had like recently switched their thing to paperless, so they didn't send you mail anymore. Of course, you know what I mean.
How convenient. All right, JG, hold that thought. We'll be right back in just a moment. JG, what are some of the themes and topics of your book?
Well, it's actually 87 different chapters, and it's broken down into a few general sections, but a lot of it is different, completely different information, and it starts out with some basic philosophical concepts, talk about the non-aggression principle and things like that. And then I kind of get into how control kind of started to manifest, at least in recent history. And then I kind of get into the whole recent banking, social engineering kind of fascist corporate craziness. And then towards the end, I start talking about some solutions. And it has an overall theme of how art has been conveying different activist messages, I guess you could say, throughout time. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that art is one of the oldest forms of protest in all reality, because people have been making political statements through art since the dawn of time. And I think that this is even more prevalent than people getting out in the streets, because even when artists don't realize it, they're making statements, you know what I'm saying?
Your radio show, which, by the way, it follows my show, and what's the link to that? How can they find it?
It is ucy.tv/jgvibes.
Okay. And go ahead.
The name of the show is Voluntary Hippie Radio.
Well, you stole the words right out of my mouth, because I wanted to ask you about that name. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a voluntary hippie? I guess I'm a hippie without volunteering a lot of the times.
Yeah, definitely. Well, basically, it is the voluntarist philosophy is deeply rooted in self-ownership and the philosophy of non-aggression, which we've had conversations about before. It's on the same lines as natural law. It's like the same idea, just different terms. And it's basically that we are our own person. We have the right to do whatever we want as long as we don't hurt anybody else, and that all human interaction should be voluntary. People shouldn't be able to legitimize their force that they put onto other people. People shouldn't be able to force other people to do things. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that, like, as a hippie and as somebody who's in what I call the counterculture with me throwing raves and the music stuff that I do, I come in contact with people that are hippies, and like you think they would be anti-authoritarian, but just a lot of the information that they have taken in has pointed them in the direction where they think that like the government's a good idea, or that they think that there is such a thing as legitimized violence. A lot of hippies think that these peace bombs over in Libya and stuff are actually peace bombs, and that's kind of upsetting for me, because
isn't that a contradiction? Peace bomb?
Yeah, exactly. And this whole humanitarian war, that's another contradiction right there. And a lot of people in the counterculture buy into this, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's really nobody out there that really wants to put themselves on the outside of things, speaking about the real issues, that some people would call conspiracy theories, or, some people would call it seditious or anarchist or whatever, but it's just talking about what is, and people throw all these labels around, like They're not saying conspiracy theorists much no more. Have you noticed that?
Well, this guy Jack Hunter did today. I don't know if you saw. We were talking about it in hour number 1. He was confronted by We Are Change and asked about his article on the Bilderberg Group. And, long story short, he said, you guys are just conspiracy theorists and you make the liberty movement look bad.
See, yeah, I'm sick of hearing about that nonsense, that you're making us look bad for talking about this.
What a bunch of pretentious pricks, if you ask me.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of a sign, like, that they're seeking approval from the mainstream. Like, that is the central point of everything that they do, is seeking approval from the mainstream. And, like, if that's what you're into, then you shouldn't really be, like, doing this, because it's going to limit you and you're going to be censoring yourself, and that's what these people are doing.
And, of course, this guy goes on Fox News. Of course, this guy is presented as the Ron Paul groupie. Who the hell is he? I don't know. I don't know where he came from. I don't know who he is. All I know is that he's supposedly within the inner circle, and he's some sort of pseudo-celebrity for the libertarian movement, or the liberty movement, which really, if you ask me, is a bit of a bowel movement.
Well, yeah, especially as far as the politics is concerned. And I mean, I'm not much of a political person, but I did notice that with that whole Ron Paul thing, as soon as he started to get support at a time when there was actually an election coming up, all these slime balls just, like, popped up in the campaign organization and in the Campaign for Liberty and all of those organizations.
Who's the slime ball that most recently was outed? Jesse Benton. Did you follow any of that?
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
So,
and then you have
people like...
Sorry to interrupt. Then you have people like Teal from PayPal, who are also, who is also a big part of the Ron Paul movement, donating millions of dollars. Well, it just so happens to be that he is an attendee at the Bilderberg meeting.
Yeah, I do remember that. And it's just, it shows you that, like, that whole system, even if you, and I'm not even going to go there. Even if you have somebody who is relatively, like, on the right page, talking about the right things, and even doing the right things, as soon as they have a chance to, I guess, shake up anything politically, they're automatically surrounded by all these goons. And I think the one guy was actually, like, married to Ron Paul's daughter or something like that, but the rest of them,
nepotism.
They had no other in. And I think that those kind of, I guess you could call them moles, like, they get in there and they infiltrate. If there was even anything to infiltrate to begin with, you know what I'm saying? But I think that it's suspect that all these people popped up right around the time when he started really getting play before an election.
Let's shift gears here, because I'm bored with it. You know, I'm tired of the whole presidential
case.
Yeah, I know you are. But when we get back, I want to hear what you ate for dinner tonight. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll ask our special guest, JG Vibes, what did you eat for dinner? It's a great question that I love to ask my various guests, and when we get back, we'll hear what he had for dinner. But first, let me tell you what I had for dinner. Tonight, I had aspartame and fluoride souffle on top of high fructose corn syrup and an extra serving of mercury. Don't go anywhere. It's the Bob Tuscan Show. We'll be right back. Okay, JG, don't let me down, brother. What did you have for dinner?
I actually have not eaten dinner yet. I will probably eat after, and I will eat these chicken tenders that I made. I actually prepared them before I got on the phone with you.
Can you give us the recipe, please?
Just like chicken, like dipped in egg and like thrown in breadcrumbs, and then repeat that process.
Now,
and, like,
is this organic chicken?
Yes, it actually is. We have.
And if it wasn't, would you tell me that it was organic?
Yeah, I probably would tell you.
Okay, and
because we all every now and then we have to, we're at some place that has nothing but fluoride water.
Let's get real. Let's get real. I know. Just because we're on the radio doesn't mean that, But still, it's so important to watch what you eat. And, talking about chicken, tons of hormones, tons of junk. They're kept right on top of each other. So they're, shining all over one another. And our food supply is just so disgusting. So disgusting.
It's rough.
Yeah, so... But, that's a topic I cover on a regular basis. And, it's probably because I'm trying to still figure out what I'm going to do. I know that when I grow my own food, that I feel best eating that food that I prepared. I'm open to raw food diets, Mark Passio has had tremendous success with his attempts at a raw food diet. And, they weren't just attempts. He really was a raw foodie for a good period of time, and from what I understand, does that at least 70% of his current diet. But I'm still learning, JG, and I'm still on the fence. Well, there's talking about eating and Mark Passio. Mark Passio is very adamant about not eating meat, not having ownership of that life, if you will, eating another animal. What's your take on that discussion for a moment, JG?
I agree with it philosophically,
yeah.
But I'm not there yet. You know what I mean?
You were raised on eating meat?
Yeah, and I mean, I have stomach issues, and I'm sickly anyway. I need band protein. I know there's ways around that without eating meat, and I'm working on that.
That's why I say I'm on the fence, because I talked to my friend Jan Irvin from Gnostic Media Podcast, and he tells me I need to be shoving down lard and staying away from wheat and any vegetables because all they are is sugar. We had Nora Gedganis on the line and Richard from Washington. Nora wrote a book about this, about the Paleolithic diet, taking a look at that. And I don't know what's what, JG. Have you been able to come away with any understanding of the best way to get our body in order? Because it's all about the mind, body, spirit, so to speak. If your body's not working, your mind's not going to be working, and therefore you won't be able to even have a philosophical discussion about unschooling or nonviolent parenting or whatever,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that the most important thing is to start getting away from the GMOs and the processed foods and all the fast foods and stuff like that. I think, and the soda. I think if anybody wants to make a big first step, because I mean, if you're eating McDonald's a couple times a week and drinking a whole bunch of soda, and
or even worse, eating out of a can or a box on a regular basis. So many people eat out of a can, box.
Yeah, I mean, 80-90% of the people out there are kind of in that situation. Maybe not that are listening to this show, but in the country at least. And I think that for somebody that's in that situation, growing your own food and starting to, invest in that kind of lifestyle might seem kind of difficult, but I would think a good in-between step would be to start cutting out the soda and, taking a look at what's GMO and what's not, and starting to get towards more organic
I'm
stuff.
all about that, the in-between step. I think you're on to something here. And I tell my listeners, it is very overwhelming once you realize, especially if, I was lucky. I always kind of was picky and that kind of thing. But it's overwhelming when you realize just how much stuff is out there that you take for granted. Even just today, I went to the store. I was on the phone with you off the air earlier today as I was at the store. And I picked up a box of pancake mix. And it was, what is this, red velvet pancake mix. I had a moment. And it looked delicious. And I come back and I start reading the ingredients and I start beating myself up when I see that it's got red 40 whatever, which is probably nasty, chemical coloring. It's got all sorts of shite. Luckily, it didn't have high fructose corn syrup, aspartame, or any of that other nasty stuff. But who knows? I don't know if that corn or that flour was genetically modified. I don't know because it's processed. So I think you're right. You're on to something when you say that you just got to eliminate that stuff and take baby steps, because it can be quite overwhelming if you take it all at once.
Yeah, definitely, and that really goes with any kind of aspect of the struggle that we're in and the situation that we're trying to build. Is there's always in-between steps everywhere. I mean, we all have a pretty good idea where we want to go. It's just getting there that's the hard part. And I think that finding some in-between steps is definitely a good strategy.
And that brings us to the end of the first hour of the show. I hope you enjoyed that. That was most of the episode. The rest of the time, it was just we were covering formalities and having random conversations, but that was really the bulk of what we talked about. So in the next segment, I'm going to be reading my audiobook, or I guess playing my audiobook, Finding Freedom in an Age of Confusion, and the PDF can be found at my website as well, aotmr.com. Email is jgvibes@aotmr.com, and the most active way to keep up with me is Facebook. That's facebook.com/jgvibes. And right now I am broadcasting on ucy.tv, which a lot of other great shows are on too. So tune into them as much as possible, and I will catch everybody on the other side of this break.
You're listening to UCY.TV. Real news, real people.
Hello, this is JG Vibes. You can catch my show, Voluntary Hippie Radio, every Wednesday night from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. on ucy.tv.
UCY.TV is an up-and-coming investigative media platform designed to give you a voice on the platform of your choice. Video, live radio, podcast, just a few. To learn more on what UCY can offer and how you can be a part of UCY.TV, simply email us at contact.ucytv@gmail.com. That's contact.ucytv@gmail.com.
You are listening to the audiobook Finding Freedom in an Age of Confusion by JG Vibes. You can find more information about my other books at aotmr.com. Chapter 1. You are a pioneer of peace. The world that we were born into and have found ourselves in today is such a complicated mess that even beginning to think about having a positive impact on society can leave any sane person feeling hopeless and defeated before they even really get started. Our culture has shielded us from the harsh reality of our existence for our entire lives, so being exposed to this reality for the first time can be very confusing or even traumatic. To react with incredulous aversion is a common thing for people to do when approached with information that contradicts the ideas that they built their lives around. When it comes to the violence of the state and the corrupt nature of the social institutions that surround us, it is very rare for anyone to take this kind of information lightly. Even after someone is able to see past the lies of the mainstream worldview, the path toward a more peaceful and free existence can be so difficult and frightening that it can even seem like an impossible suicide mission. This is the obstacle that prevents most people from even attempting to change or criticize the society that they were brought up in. If creating a free society and a world without war was easy, then I guarantee you that overnight millions of people would instantly be condemning the state and the moral injustice of the violence that it carries out. Since creating freedom where there is now a dictatorship is a very delicate and painstaking process with no real instruction manual, it can seem like a very daunting task. However, humanity is a species capable of incredible things that were once seen as impossible and unthinkable. Today we live in a world with tools and capabilities that would appear to be magic to our ancestors. Yet, we still have yet to escape the primitive traditions that held them captive in their time and continue to hold us captive today. We can instantly speak to people all over the world, travel into space, and store incredible amounts of information into extremely small spaces. But sadly, we live our day-to-day lives in confusion and fear just as so many generations did before us. This era that we are living in now is an extremely pivotal time in the human story because we really have reached that long-awaited moment where we have become advanced enough to destroy this planet and everything on it, yet at the same time escape the enslavement that has been experienced by our ancestors. This is a massive responsibility, a responsibility that can only be met with radical elevation in consciousness that will allow our species to finally become civilized beings. No self-respecting creature wants to look at themselves or the society that they identify with as being barbaric or uncivilized. Surely, even the cavemen who painted on the walls with animal dung thought of themselves as being gentlemen and scholars. However, when a species is killing each other by the millions, enslaving each other, and taking part in the kind of culturally justified violence that we see today, it becomes apparent that there is still a lot of work to be done before we can honestly say that humanity is civilized. This is a worthwhile goal, though, to do what we can during our lives to leave the world and the human consciousness in a better condition than they were when we inherited them. In all reality, one could argue that this is the meaning of life. It is not an easy path to take, and there is no guarantee that you will see the fruits of your labor in your own lifetime, but any new frontier is always shrouded in this same sort of uncertainty, danger, and controversy. The creation of the world's first free society in recorded history is simply the most recent frontier in the realm of human consciousness, just as space exploration is the most recent frontier in the physical realm. Just 100 years ago, if you told someone that you were going to build a rocket and fly people into outer space, you may have run the risk of being committed to a mental hospital. Yet despite popular opinion, the human imagination has once again defied our previous conception of reality by exploring new frontiers and pushing beyond the boundaries of what was said to be possible. If you are reading these words, then you are without a doubt in the midst of today's great frontier, the fight for freedom and the search for peace. You are a pioneer who has the courage to journey into uncharted territory and be your own map maker. Along with the millions of others worldwide who are beginning to find their purpose, you have the ability to change the world for the better in your lifetime. No matter what kind of situation you come from or where you call home, you have found yourself on a rewarding but arduous path. I know because I have been walking this path for the better part of my life, And some years ago, I passed the point of no return, to where this path has now become my home, in a sense. After realizing that there was no turning back, I have tried my best to find the beauty and positivity that surrounds me on this path that I have chosen, and I have found a lot to be optimistic about. I have also made a lot of mistakes and wasted too much time worrying about things that I shouldn't have. All of these experiences, both good and bad, have resulted in the essays contained in this book. These are simply my thoughts on the research that I have done and the world that I see around me. If you want the names, dates, and facts, that has all been saved for my hardback book, Alchemy of the Modern Renaissance, which I will refer to when sourcing is necessary. If you want more information on Alchemy of the Modern Renaissance, just check out aotmr.com. There you can view reviews and a table of contents which features a breakdown of all 87 chapters. Chapter 2. Reclaiming Your Self-Esteem. There is not a person in this world who is immune to the detrimental effect that mainstream culture has on one's self-esteem. Even the tyrants who themselves destroy people's self-esteem by violently imposing their will on others live a life of mental discomfort because they are demoralized by their own actions and the world that they create. From the first day that we begin to observe the world as children, everyone around us seems so big and intimidating that we give their opinions and beliefs way too much credit and way too much power over us. Since our early years are so vital to our mental development and the formation of our worldview, we carry this tendency to unquestionably submit to authority throughout our lives because that is the trait that we learned in our younger years. When all of us grew up, we were subject to daily, if not hourly, judgments on our community value and our moral integrity from various figures of so-called authority. These authority figures, at home, at school, and in society, are constantly working to undermine the self-esteem of the general population by making these judgments and treating those in their care like second-class citizens. It is not necessarily the fault of the individuals who end up in these positions of authority. They are merely passing along the oppressive cultural norms that were forced onto them at one time or another. That's not to say they aren't responsible for their actions, because they are, but at the same time, they are not the cause of this trouble. They are just a symptom. In a world where we are constantly forced to engage with people who have complete control over us, especially from a young age, it becomes very difficult to develop any self-confidence, and the idea of being independent in any way can seem absolutely horrifying. The rise of centralized government schooling in the past 200 years has accelerated this process by treating people like toddlers well into adulthood, causing them to develop with immature, independent personalities in many cases. In school, we are taught how to conform with the majority, regurgitate meaningless facts, and submit to authority, but we really don't learn anything of value. That which is valuable and taught in public schools can obviously be taught and learned without government involvement, centralized control, and the overall oppressive form that these indoctrination centers have taken. It is this structure that is maintained by government intervention that is responsible for the dumbing down of our society and for totally destroying our generation's self-esteem. For the most crucial years of our development, we are constantly getting the message that our thoughts, ideas, desires, fears, and disagreements are completely unimportant. We learn that our needs and our opinions are secondary to people in authority, who are not to be questioned, and who have the ability to punish or exile you at any time. This is an incredibly scary and traumatizing situation for any child, even if they don't realize it. These are the scars that are carried into adulthood and eventually create very serious problems in the real world by causing people to act violent and irrational or just make them completely miserable. These are legitimate traumas that need to be recognized and worked out by everyone. All of us were born into primitive cultures where we are subject to expectations and standards that we should not have had forced upon us. In most cases, these expectations are completely impossible to fulfill, and in many cases even pointless. Realizing these simple facts is the first step in repairing one's self-esteem after being beaten down by an authoritarian, soul-destroying culture. Far too many of the world's people feel inadequate and insignificant because they don't match up with the unrealistic and insane expectations that are set by the mainstream culture. Forget about those expectations, and forget about those standards. They are no good for anyone, and they are not a true measure of your worth. Using arbitrary traits like wealth, status, and appearance as social measurements is a recipe for disaster, as it degrades human beings and destroys their self-worth. You really can't gauge the value of someone's life by external factors at all, but if someone must be judged, it should be according to their actions and how they treat those around them, not the superficial standards set by the mainstream culture. Chapter 3. You are king or queen. The mainstream view of history that has been handed down by the aristocracy presents the idea that great things can only be accomplished by mythical heroes who know all of the right things to say and all of the right things to do, and who are completely devoid of fear, doubt, regret, or any of the other vulnerable emotions that we all feel as human beings. Throughout the better part of history, kings and priests have created a social atmosphere in which they were these heroes, although in real life they were nothing like the image that they put forward. In American culture, the politicians are always presented in this mythical context where they are said to have the superhuman ability to know what is best for millions of other people at all times, just as the kings and priests did who came before them. During times of social change, whichever ruler happened to be in power was naturally associated with that change due to the personality cult that is traditionally inherited by those in that position. However, this view of history is giving far too much credit to the individuals who have waged wars and signed contracts. Sadly, we live in a world where there are different classes of people who have different sets of rules and different rights according to their relationship with those in power or their ability to use force and fraud on others. This all takes place without any social stigma, despite the fact that people claim to recognize that human beings were created equal. The truth is that we all were created equal, but we live in societies where we are not treated as equals because small groups of sophists have established cultural norms that ensure that they are the rulers of everyone else, instead of their equals. This was obvious during the times of monarchy and open slavery, but now the rulers have quite effectively hid behind democracy and communism, both ideas that claim to put power in the hands of the people but really does nothing but strengthen the state and give people more deceptive avenues to oppress their neighbors. This may be the state of society, but this does not have to be the state of our lives, and it does not have to be the future of humanity. While it may be true that there are people out there who think they have authority over us and will probably do us harm if they get the chance, this does not mean that this authority actually exists. This authority is nothing more than an illusion. It doesn't matter how many people respect this illusion, it still isn't real. With that being said, there is no sense to live like it is real. Besides, there is no reason for us to be acting like second-class citizens just because we are treated as such. Each and every one of us are autonomous beings who have the right to think and act however we wish as long as we bring no harm on anyone else. In other words, you are your own king or queen, whichever term applies to you. No one is your owner, regardless of how many politicians come along and claim ownership over you. You are the master of your own domain, and the master of your own future. It is true that we are living in a situation where our possibilities are limited, and we are forced to conform in certain ways when the powers that shouldn't be are looking. But none of that changes reality, so it does not have to change the way that we look at things. When you accept the worldview of those who oppress you and act as if it were true, you are disempowering yourself and giving your abuser the upper hand. This is what happens when we attempt to conform with standards that we know are unjust, and then proceed to emotionally attack ourselves when we naturally fall short. The story of those in power is the only story that has been told throughout history, partly due to the mass illiteracy of the general population and partly due to the indoctrination efforts directly taken by those in power. This is why people are so quick to go with the flow when the flow is visibly being pulled towards a giant waterfall. Our ancestors had an extremely difficult time coming to terms with all this, which is why they never achieved freedom, and why they didn't resist the establishment of the control systems that exist today. However, our generation does not have to be the same. We have the tools and the power to turn this all around and create a world where everyone has autonomy. The first step to getting there is to act yourself as if you were your own master, and make efforts to advance and spread this philosophy of self-ownership. Chapter 4. The Golden Age is tomorrow, not yesterday. Every generation that has walked the earth was unable to imagine or comprehend what tomorrow would bring. This inability to see the future leaves many with the unspoken idea that their moment in history and what they see in their day-to-day life is the maximum level of advancement and understanding that humanity is capable of. Obviously, generations of people have been proven wrong because we continue to advance in both understanding and capability, yet it is still rare for someone to imagine anything other than the world they know. With this kind of mentality, which most of the world has come to embrace, there is a sense of intense nostalgia for an era that they were not alive to see, but one that has been idealized by older generations and the stories that have been handed down through the ages. This makes politics a very messy business, because when things go wrong, as they always do, people don't know where to look for a comparison for their situation, so they are left to dwell on the image of the good old days that have been painted in their minds since childhood. I'm sure that every culture has their own golden age that is looked to for model of the current civilization. In America, we have the farce of the Founding Fathers and the myth of limited constitutional government. It is deeply ingrained in our culture that, sure, things may be screwed up now, but once upon a time in this place called the United States of America, there were these heroic and selfless aristocrats called the Founding Fathers who ran things, and everyone loved them, and everyone was happy, and everyone was free and prosperous. This is the cartoonish version of events that plays out in our history books and the cultural myths that are so present in our everyday lives, but it has nothing to do with reality. I'm not saying that a lot of America's founding fathers weren't brilliant people with a few good ideas here and there. There are some core philosophical principles that they did a great job enshrining, at least in theory and rhetoric, for future generations, such as ourselves, to carry on. However, many of these people were still quite oppressive, both in their personal and political lives. Many of the Founding Fathers owned slaves and were extremely racist, classist, and male-chauvinistic. They were also not so popular in their own times as the history books describe either. The politicians of the past, even in early America, were just as unpopular as today's politicians, and the Founding Fathers were no different. There were constant rebellions among the general population in the generation surrounding the Declaration of Independence because people rightly saw their local colonial government as just as oppressive as the British Empire. These rebellions were often met with brutal force by the aristocrats who were idealized in American history books as the nation's founding fathers. Despite what is said in the history books, people still took up arms and risked their lives fighting against the American government because their standard of living was so low. It is true that people living during this time were probably significantly more free than your average person today, and they had to deal with fairly little government intervention in comparison to us. It is true that people living during this time were probably significantly more free than your average person today, and they had to deal with fairly little government intervention in comparison to us. This was still a pretty rough time and place to live, and the political structure was still responsible for an extremely low standard of living among the general population. With that being the case, I think it's safe to say that this period in history may not be the best time to look back to as the golden age that needs to be replicated politically. For the most part, the story of our history has been one of a constant but slow progression towards a more free society. Slowly but surely, one by one, generation by generation, we shed the insane and irrational ideas that held our ancestors captive. When approached from this angle, it seems counterproductive to reach into the past to find a path towards a free society when one never existed in the past, at least in recorded history anyway. There are plenty of lessons that can be learned from studying history, but when it comes to solving today's difficult world problems, looking into the past for primitive solutions just isn't going to work. One of the greatest mysteries of the world is the repetitious cycle of history and how our species continues to make the same mistakes over and over again. This cycle probably has many different causes, but this cultural myth of the Golden Age is without a doubt a contributor. Thousands of years ago, republics and democracies were seen as the ideal ways of organizing society. But time showed that these systems of government bred corruption just as any system of coercive social control naturally does. This corruption resulted in an economic and cultural collapse that was spread across the whole civilized world and lasted many generations. With the democratic and republican systems of government a proven failure, our ancient ancestors had an opportunity to create a free society in its ashes. Unfortunately, this did not happen, because people's minds were still trapped in the paradigm of domination, so while they may have escaped the physical restraints that were imposed on them by their local coercive regime, they did not philosophically overcome the ideas which allowed those local regimes to act as they did in the first place. Putting an end to tyranny isn't accomplished by just overthrowing a tyrant. Likewise, there is no treaty that can be signed to prevent other tyrants from rising in their place. When violence and oppression is being carried out on a mass scale, it is only able to go on so long as the general population is conned into believing that whatever is taking place is a good thing. However, when the specific violent acts that are being carried out are proven as immoral and socially unacceptable, it will be impossible for tyrants to convince anyone to take part in their madness. This is what I mean by philosophically overcoming ideas, instead of just switching rulers or pushing papers around. At the fall of the Roman Empire, the paradigm was not changed. There was no philosophical advancement. In fact, there was actually a regression to long-term feudalism, perhaps because everyone was frightened into clinging to the past instead of creating a better future. This is just one prominent example that relates to today's political climate, but there are many examples everywhere throughout history which show how humanity seems to make the same mistakes over and over again by embracing the same bad ideas. Today we find ourselves in another time of great change, where the established powers are on shaky ground, and the general population is starting to realize that the way of life that has been hoisted upon them is unsustainable, and that a new path is necessary. This happens regularly every few generations, but unfortunately every single time the worldview has remained the same and the cycle was never broken. The worldview has remained the same because for many centuries the dismal state of our civilization has been largely ignored by those who have had to live through it. The pain, depression, and confusion that can come from admitting the twisted nature of our day-to-day existence has been far too much for most people to cope with. So throughout history, people have created extremely complex justifications and rationalizations for the violence and insanity that was taking place around them. This is how our species has gotten to where it is today, with numerous brutal empires stretching across the entire globe to the point where there is no longer anywhere to escape to. With the general population in a constant state of denial for many generations, the people and organizations that control the world's land and resources have been able to consolidate their power with minimal resistance. This is a process that has been taking place since the dawn of civilization, from the times of human sacrifice and divine rule. People oftentimes make the mistake of thinking that the revolution started right at the moment when they found out about it. In reality, the battle between freedom and enslavement has been raging for centuries, and has played out like a relay race where each generation passes the mission along to the next. The only problem is that those on the side of freedom have not had the ability to participate in the process. For the better part of history, the general population was illiterate and poorly educated, making it that much more difficult to immortalize their side of the story and their ideas for future generations. Meanwhile, those who sought to enslave humanity were very familiar with planning beyond their own time, as it often took many generations to complete large projects such as palaces, bridges, and monuments. Military conquests were known to take several generations as well. The ruling class has always been accustomed to long-term plans and goals that lasted throughout their own lifetimes. Sadly, with most of humanity living on a survival-based existence for the better part of history, it has been hard for people to see past their next meal. So looking into future lifetimes was probably not very common. Although, at least in the past, there was some sort of concern for the world that was being left behind for the unborn, even though there was still widespread confusion and indoctrination. Nowadays, with the extremely sophisticated mental conditioning made possible through the media and government schools, people have been trained to live as if they were the last generation on Earth, in total nihilism. On top of that, people continue to pass along the mentality of their oppressors onto their children as their ancestors had onto them. Luckily, thanks to the widespread decentralization of information that has been made possible by the internet, there are more people than ever who are starting to question the society that they were born into. This is definitely a great victory in the struggle for freedom, but unfortunately, many people have become depressed and discouraged when coming to the reality of their existence. A world of peace and rationality seems like such a total stretch of the imagination because it is drastically different from what we experience today, but that doesn't mean that that world is impossible. Every generation there are many drastic paradigm shifts that radically alter the way that people interact with each other, and for the most part, all throughout human history, these shifts have contributed to a slow upward progression towards a more peaceful world. Unfortunately, tragedies like mass murder, slavery, and subjugation do still take place, but they are getting harder and harder to justify because our species is in the process of evolving beyond the type of mentalities that trigger this kind of behavior. When approached from this perspective, it becomes obvious that freedom and peace is inevitable for our species. That does not mean that you should just sit back and wait for it to happen, because the more people who get involved and put their intellect and energy towards outgrowing the violent social systems that we were all born into, the faster it will actually happen. By noting that the struggle that we are facing is a multi-generational one, I am in no way saying that our generation can't make great progress in our lifetime and lay a solid foundation for a free society while we are here on Earth. I am simply making the point that although it may seem like this moment in time is the climax of the human story, every person who is alive right now was born into an age-old revolution that will eventually be passed on to future generations to carry on. That's how things really are when you think about the big picture. This doesn't just apply to parents and their children. Anyone who has the potential to develop and share an idea has the potential to lay the foundation for the first free society that has ever existed. Chapter 5. The state is not invincible, it's just a bad idea. Throughout the course of history, people have fought against tyranny and authority over various forms only to be thrown back into subjugation once again when someone else came along to claim what we call power. There have been countless battles to overthrow these established powers, but none of them resulting in freedom for humanity in the long term, because all of these struggles were playing out on the wrong battlefield. All this time, the oppressed thought that they were fighting against people, when they really should have been fighting against ideas. Sure, it is true that our ancestors and everyone alive now are enslaved by some really nasty people, but even if all of those people were to disappear, the ideas that allowed them to commit their crimes without consequence would still remain, leaving the door open for future authoritarians to repeat the process. Sadly, this concept is still not understood by many, who have the understandable but misguided tendency to think that violence is going to solve any of their problems. For far too long our species has used violence as a tool. Violence has been the very basis of our social organization and problem solving for the better part of history. This is most likely why people are so quick to resort to violence in any conflict, and this is also one of the reasons why so many fail to see the violence that is forced into their everyday life by the various state institutions and mercantilist corporations that they come in contact with. One of Albert Einstein's most famous quotes is, "Problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them." This quote definitely applies to the situation we are discussing today, and sheds some light onto why the violent revolutions of the past were never able to achieve their goal of setting the human race free from authority. Throughout our lives we have been fed lie after lie by the establishment, and unfortunately, even when someone discovers the violent nature of that establishment, they are still met with the task of sifting through everything they have ever been told to see what was true and what was not. When that backtracking doesn't take place, it is common for people to get caught up in the vengeful mentality that comes along with learning about one's own enslavement. When lies about human nature or the capability of our species are still not recognized and addressed, then it is very hard for people to wrap their minds around nonviolent and non-political solutions to the problems that we see in the world today. The state and all of its predatory appendages like the corporate and military-industrial complex are not groups of people with weapons who need to be overthrown. They are just bad ideas that can very easily be rendered obsolete with the right combination of good ideas. The only battlefield that the revolution can be won on is in the mind. To destroy the problems that were created with violence, the most effective weapons are good ideas and nonviolent solutions, not violence or politics. Chapter 6. You are not alone. For far too long, people who have cared about freedom and imagined a better world for our species have felt alone in their interests and have been forced onto the fringes of society. Things are a lot different now, though, as the philosophy of freedom and non-aggression is beginning to seep into the mainstream culture. There was probably always a good portion of society who rejected authority in their hearts, but because of how big the world was in previous generations, the odds of these people crossing paths were very slim. Today the world is much smaller, and there is now a wealth of information like never before seen in history, available to more people than ever. Now free thinkers crossing paths with one another is a daily occurrence, which is helping to push along the philosophical renaissance that I predicted in my hardback book, Alchemy of the Modern Renaissance. There is still a lot of work to be done, though, because we are fighting an uphill battle where our opponent was given a head start. The vast majority of people alive today were molded by the state in public schools and entertained by propaganda in their free time, so there is still that to contend with. Despite all of this effort, the human spirit is so resilient to the irrational and unnatural concept of authority that even after 12 years of indoctrination and constant manipulation, people are still able to figure out that they are being taken advantage of. Even with this growing awakening, talking about freedom and improving society is still a taboo subject, because people mistake philosophical discourse with the childish game of politics, which creates armies of dogmatic followers who care more about slandering the other side than actually solving problems. This creates a situation where no one feels comfortable about sharing their opinions in public, so no one really knows just how many rebels are out there. In reality, there are a lot more rebels out there than most people think, but they go mostly unnoticed because they try their best to fit in to avoid ridicule. This is why it is important for those of us who are out there to start making as much noise as possible, so we can let the other rebels know that they are not alone and encourage them to come out of hiding. Deep down we are all rebels, and the more people who step forward to admit it, the closer we'll be to achieving freedom. We are all born rebels. That is our natural state. It is only after a long time of being beaten down by insane culture that we come to embrace insanity for the sake of convenience ourselves. For the most part, everyone out there is just pretending to go along with the status quo. Even those who wholeheartedly embrace it are still forced to use watered-down language and newspeak to describe the world around them, because the cold hard truth is just too much for them to bear. Now that the government is imploding on itself, the status quo has become less of a convenience for people, so they are now more open to new ideas than ever, and the rebels are starting to come out of hiding. These like-minded people are all around you, and the more open you are about your own beliefs, the more sane people you will come across and attract into your own life. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good idea to get in everyone's faces about it and create awkward situations for yourself all the time, but it is smart to put out subtle hints and see if anyone's picking up on it, and then you can find out who may be receptive to your ideas and who may not be worth bothering with. There is no sense in sitting around and beating a dead horse with someone who is not interested. This will only create tension and make you believe that the whole world is exactly like the people that you end up debating with. There are kind, intelligent, free-thinking rebels out there. There are plenty of them. But you are not going to find them by debating people who are deeply entrenched in their own worldview. Engaging in these debates is still important and valuable, but you will be disappointed if you expect to find like-minded people through this process. Again, that's not to say that you can't associate or discuss philosophy with people who disagree with you, because you certainly can and should, but to expand the circle of people who are on the same page as you are, you must be constantly meeting and interacting with new people. When humanity has gone through times of great change, it has rarely been a process that can be defined by a single event. Paradigm shift is typically a slow process in which one by one people slowly begin to evolve in their understanding of the world. I would say that the paradigm shift that we are currently experiencing has already begun, and has actually been taking place for decades now. Chapter 7. Respectfully disagree without compromise. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has noticed that the freedom movement is quickly becoming just as polarized and divided as the mainstream political circles that are presented in the media. While it is absolutely important that we stay true to our individual principles, that does not mean that it is productive for us to immediately disregard anyone who doesn't see the world exactly as we see it. Likewise, this especially does not give us the right to belittle or ridicule those who have different ideas than we do. The truth is that we all have blind spots in our thinking, and we all have things to learn from other people. It is possible to have a friendly conversation with someone who sees the world completely different than you do, without sacrificing your beliefs and without expecting them to sacrifice theirs. That's not to say that there are no right or wrong answers, because in many cases there are things which can be verified and proven, but standing on opposing ends of an issue and shoving ideas down one another's throats as fast as possible is how the Republicrats communicate. It is not how we should be communicating in the freedom movement. For those of us who stand outside of the left-right political paradigm, we can see the stagnation and inefficiency that is caused by this sort of divisive approach at communication and problem solving. Debates in political circles are always centered more around scoring points and showing off, instead of being focused on actually solving the problems at hand, which is one of the many reasons why there are never any real political solutions to any of the world's problems. With that being said, there is a growing number of people throughout the world who are becoming disgusted with the violence and subjugation that has become commonplace in all of our societies. These people all come from very different backgrounds. They have led different lives, had different experiences, and each have taken in a wide variety of contrasting information about the world that we live in. Due to the fact that all of these people have entered the freedom movement, or the resistance, or the revolution, or whatever you want to call it, all of these people have entered this movement with different preconceived notions about why we are in this mess and how to get out. This may seem like a dangerous and volatile situation because we are so used to seeing people who think differently tear each other apart. But in reality, this is a beautiful gift that we should all embrace and attempt to learn from as much as we possibly can. If we think of the global situation as a giant puzzle, we can describe all of these different people with different viewpoints as each being a unique piece in that puzzle that is essential for its completion. Some of us may be voluntarists or libertarians, some of us may be constitutionalists, while others may be socialists or futurists, and we all may disagree on a lot of things. But the bottom line is that we all have a great deal to learn from one another, and there is no way we are going to fight the mercantilist monster that stands before us if we don't respect one another's opinions and we refuse to entertain the possibility that someone with a different opinion has the potential to teach us something. As free thinkers, we should celebrate the moment that we learn new information, even if that information may cause us to change our minds and feel differently about certain things. In fact, I would say that the ability to overcome one's own ego and change their minds when presented with new information is one of the fundamental characteristics of a free thinker. Now again, I want to be clear that this doesn't mean that you have to go around agreeing with what everyone says, or that you can't be firm in your convictions, because this is all important too. But it is just as important to remember that we are in this fight to solve problems and reduce the level of violence that we see around us. We are not here to score debate points and form cliques. Chapter 8. The sky may be falling, but it's only a storm. Recently, with more and more people becoming aware that something just isn't right in their society, the police state has gone into overdrive to compensate for this growing resistance to the status quo. It seems so crazy between the drug war escalation, the expansion of the NATO colonization in the Middle East and Africa, and the chain of recent authoritarian pieces of legislation that we have seen slide through Congress, including the National Defense Authorization Act, anti-protest laws, and strip search laws. I'll be the first to admit that everything that is going on right now is very ominous, and there are some serious issues that must be faced head-on by our species. However, I also see a lot of things going on in these strange times that we are living that make me feel somewhat optimistic about the future of humanity. First off, the frantic behavior displayed by the government and the mainstream media in the past year or two is showing just how desperate the powers that shouldn't be are getting. Their whole scam is dependent upon their control over the human consciousness, and that control is beginning to unravel. This is the same kind of situation that happens when someone in a debate is faced with an argument superior to their own, so they resort to screaming, yelling, and ad hominem attacks. When someone is exposed as illegitimate or guilty of some sort of transgression, it is fairly typical to see them act out in verbal or even physical aggression. It is not unusual for guilty parties to act outraged about accusations against them and then to paint the victim as a villain. This kind of scenario is exactly what we have been seeing play out in the macrocosm of geopolitics, as more and more people are becoming aware of their enslavement. The establishment is lashing out with all of their might to overcompensate for their own obsolescence and illegitimacy, which is now being revealed to the public on a day-to-day basis. What we are going through right now may seem crazy and unusual, but really it's nothing new. Sure, it is true that our civilization is currently in a free fall to collapse, but this has been a long time coming, and it has happened to nearly every civilization that has ever erected a palace. In the past decade, hundreds of societies have collapsed and begun to rebuild. In today's technological civilizations, the collapse can be far less dangerous, violent, and miserable than the times of ancient Rome, but only if the people within the society are willing to work together and cooperatively face the adversity that has disrupted their path. There is no doubt that we are in the midst of a storm that has been raging for centuries, and the intensity of that storm is growing by the minute. For this, we have every reason to make any and all preparations that we deem to be necessary, but we should not be consumed by fear to the point where we are considering violence or nihilism. The reason why there is so much fear surrounding the obvious downfall of our civilization is because people have grown detached from their communities and have lost their ability to be self-sufficient. With that being the case, the first step towards overcoming that fear and preparing for the oncoming storm is to get more familiar with your community and start thinking about ways in which you can be more self-sufficient. Growing food, getting to know your neighbors, establishing community study groups, and learning about off-the-grid solutions are just a few ways to strengthen your family and your community as living standards continue to deteriorate. People these days are talking about the end of America like we are somehow going to forget about what we have built in the past generations and return to pre-industrial living conditions simply because the government and their fiat currency has failed and may not be around for much longer. In the meantime, we are still dealing with a dictatorship which has been writing authoritarianism into law for well over a decade now, so we must remain vigilant on that front. But at the same time, we must not become overwhelmed with what they are throwing at us, because that is exactly what they are trying to provoke. The establishment wants us paralyzed with fear so they can prevent us from making any moves that might rock the boat. But we can't row the boat to safety without rocking it, so we must find the courage within ourselves to make waves instead of sitting around waiting for the boat to row itself or waiting for the deranged hijacker of the boat to set sail in his own direction. It is absolutely true that we are dealing with one of the worst dictatorships that has ever walked the earth, and I am in no way trying to downplay the seriousness of this issue. However, we must not be scared into thinking that there aren't any options for us, or that we are fighting a losing battle, because those kinds of defeatist attitudes actually prevent us from making any real progress. While we should not fear our oppressors and their increasingly maniacal activity, we should prepare for the reality of our situation, and we should be planning for the future. Chapter 9. Learn from everyone, but be your own teacher. We should have the ability to learn from everyone and everything around us, but there is no need to limit ourselves by ignoring information that may be contrary to our viewpoints. Even my own work is merely one resource of many, and after you finish reading this, I urge you to continue your research so you can form your own unique opinions about what's going on in the world. No one source of information should be the foundation of your worldview. When that happens, you are giving another person the power of thinking for you. Throughout most of the world, people are taught to look at society in a very polarized way. When certain issues are presented to us through mainstream circles, they are usually oversimplified to the point where all concepts are either black or white and all people are either good or bad, with no in between. The reality of the situation is that things are much more complicated than that. There are usually many different ways of looking at things, many different sides to the story. This is especially true in the study of philosophy, because terms are constantly being redefined and ideas constantly re-examined with every new generation of philosophers in order to accommodate the new insight and information that has become available over time. Things are much more complicated than simply picking a political party or social clique and subscribing yourself to a whole system of beliefs based on other people's ideas. Unfortunately, this is the kind of approach that is generally embraced worldwide, partly because this is how we have been taught to think, and partly because it's a lot easier than doing all the rigorous research and contemplation necessary to get to the bottom of important social issues. Especially today, with the incredible amount of contradictory information that is available on the internet, people are becoming increasingly overwhelmed when trying to separate fact from fiction. Sifting through all of this information and comparing it with each other in contemplation isn't easy, but it's a necessary part of achieving any kind of certainty in your research. This is the difference between coming to your own conclusions instead of just adopting the conclusions of others. There are plenty of people out there with great ideas, and there's nothing wrong with having a few trusted researchers that you look to regularly for reliable information. But don't take anyone's word at face value, and don't disregard information purely on the source without confirming its inaccuracy for yourself. There are plenty of researchers out there who are very knowledgeable and on point in some respects, while still uninformed and off base in many other areas that they comment on. This is why we should critically assess all of the information that we come across, and search for alternative views to get a well-rounded idea of what we are trying to figure out. There are researchers out there who are brilliant in terms of analyzing foreign policy, but who have terribly misguided views on economics. Perfect examples of this would be people like Noam Chomsky or Webster Tarpley. We all can learn a lot from both of them in many areas of research, especially foreign policy and war, but their views on economics are sadly rooted in statist propaganda. On the other hand, someone like Stefan Molyneux I agree with on everything relating to government and economics, yet I totally disagree with him on psychedelics, alternative lifestyles, mainstream science, and spirituality. I'm not knocking any of these people, they're all great. I'm just giving examples of how everyone has their strong positions and their weak positions, so it's best to come to your own conclusions instead of just taking on someone else's, even if it's someone you usually agree with on other issues. I'm sure I have plenty of blind spots of my own, just like anyone else, but this is exactly why it is important to look up everything for ourselves and check the source documentation to confirm that the information we are receiving is accurate. No one has all of the right answers all the time, and if someone pretends to, you might want to proceed with extra caution. For far too long, learning has been a top-down process in our culture, and someday those who come after us will look back in horror at the methods that were used to stifle one of the most vital resources on the planet, the human imagination. Chapter 10. Another look at the Doomsday Myth. With the state of our civilization in total disarray, many people are starting to prepare for the possibility of a period with fewer modern conveniences than we have today. Some would call these people careful, others would call them prudent or wise. Some might even call them paranoid, but these days the mainstream media has branded these people as doomsday preppers. This title not only works to discredit people who are seeking to be independent and get off the grid, but also perpetuates the myth that a doomsday is even coming. I would argue that we are already in doomsday, and have been for most of recorded history. It is true that something different is coming. The signs are all around us in the deteriorating economy and culture that we've been raised to worship. So if it's not doomsday, then what is everyone preparing for? And what is all this madness leading up to? Well, it's quite possible that the downfall of this civilization could be the greatest thing to ever happen to humanity. This could be the final fall of Babylon. We could be prepping for Freedom Day, if we so choose. Think about it. Millions feel helpless because they see the madness that is created by our social institutions, and they cannot conceive of a way that this system could be overthrown. Meanwhile, this system is overthrowing itself in plain sight, right in front of us. Many of us wish that the government could be overthrown, yet we fear its inevitable collapse when we should be embracing it. There is no escaping it anyway. It's already coming, and in many ways it is already even here. If it wasn't for the Fed popping up the economy with more debt and fake money, our moment of truth would have been long since past, and it probably would have made things a lot easier for us to deal with in the long run. With that being the case, their deception is going to run up eventually. They can only play this game for so long before hyperinflation takes effect and topples their already shaky house of cards. This could be an incredible opportunity for the human race, if we are adequately prepared in terms of getting our physical needs met, as well as developing the mental and philosophical maturity that is required for the establishment of a free society. While the world seems to be descending into insanity all around us, it is important for us as individuals to assess the kinds of goods and services that may be needed after an economic collapse, and devise peaceful, sustainable methods by which we can provide these values to our families and communities. There is no doubt that this whole collapse has been staged by international interests who seek to implement their own sadistic plans for the human race when this time comes. However, they will only be able to create their authoritarian slave farm if the slaves themselves ask for this and assist in creating it. The slaves, which is pretty much all of us, will only ask for this deeper enslavement if they are unaware of its consequences and see no possible alternatives. This is why it is important for us to develop solutions to meet our needs and the needs of our neighbors without depending on the initiation of the use of force, as that is a method of doing business that has destroyed civilizations time and time again. Likewise, it is equally important for us to advance a proper understanding of philosophy and of our current situation, so the population is socially mature enough to be their own masters and to accept the new and unusual nonviolent solutions that will be presented to them by intelligent people like yourself. Chapter 11. There is nothing positive about willful ignorance. If you aren't satisfied with the status quo and you discuss those feelings with people on a regular basis, then there is no doubt that at one time or another you have been told things like, "Stop being so negative," or "Can't you just focus on the more positive things in life?" We can all probably think back on way too many of those frustrating moments where our peers have expected us to share in their blissful evasion of reality. Unfortunately, the longer that we ignore the problems that face our species and leave them for someone else to deal with, the worse our predicament becomes. At first glimpse, these issues may seem overwhelming and insurmountable, but simply knowing that they exist is the first step towards freeing your mind and creating a better world for all of us to live in. In this book, we focused on more positive discussions, but we must be in complete awareness of reality and not deny the unpleasant things that we have to live with. If you had a debilitating illness that could be cured, wouldn't you want to get a diagnosis immediately and start doing what was needed in order to begin healing yourself? Or would you rather do nothing and ignore the disease because it was negative? Sadly, we have been led to believe that ignorance is bliss, while it is actually the reason for the majority of the suffering that has taken place throughout history. If we are not fully aware of what is going on, then there is no way that we can possibly improve the quality of life on this earth. Everyone wants to be positive, and it is definitely understandable for someone to put things off that may be difficult, sad, or painful. However, this is no excuse to ignore legitimate problems that need to be fixed, and it is certainly no reason to allow crimes to be committed before our very eyes. Every generation that has come before us has been absolutely petrified of standing up to challenge the status quo. For centuries, the buck has been passed down the line, and our species has continued to ride this roller coaster of confusion and oppression. In so many ways, we have come so far and learned so much. Our civilization once accepted open slavery, racism, war, and authoritarianism as simple facts of life. Now we are finally beginning to shed some of these neuroses and have started to consider the fact that maybe there is a better way. While this all sounds very good, we still have a very long way to go because we are really only beginning to discover these concepts. We are far from understanding them and even farther from putting them into practice. One of the main things preventing us from actually achieving peace and freedom is the simple fact that so many people who realize that the status quo is insane are too afraid to speak out because they are too worried about what their parents, friends, or even what total strangers would think. Deep down, most people aren't pleased with the state of our civilization, But since it is socially unacceptable to question it, everyone goes on thinking that they are alone, weak, and powerless. Discouraged, most people just create justifications for what's going on around them, tell themselves it's the only world that's possible, and then proceed to ridicule anyone who challenges their unconsciously created facade. This is why many people go on putting up with circumstances that they find intolerable. They are afraid of being alienated from their peers. Don't be discouraged by people who can't handle reality. Remember that most of them are just afraid and aren't ready to come to terms with the truth yet. Just like a battered child who cries when being taken away from the so-called safety of their abusive parents, we as adults also feel comfortable in unacceptable situations simply because we are familiar with them. Much like the child, we need to break free from the familiar confines of our abuse and oppression. Interestingly enough, this situation is so common that the condition is actually classified medically as Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is typically used to describe hostages who develop positive feelings for their kidnapper because they are dependent upon them for their sustenance. When we apply this concept to the macrocosm of our civilization, we find that people living under a system of authoritarianism exhibit these same characteristics. Of course, this idea is one of many that can be traced all the way back to ancient times. Written in ancient Greece, the allegory of the cave from Plato's Republic depicted this exact social phenomenon. There is nothing positive about running away from freedom and putting off peace. The most positive thing that anyone can do is learn as much as they can about how to fix the most negative things that are going on in the world. Anyone that tells you otherwise is actively working to keep the world in the dismal state that it is in, whether they realize it or not. Sheltering ourselves from the harshness of our reality will only foster a more toxic and oppressive world for our children to grow up in.
If you want to achieve in this life, you need to set your goals higher.
UCY.TV is an up-and-coming investigative media platform designed to give you a voice on the platform of your choice. Video, live radio, podcast, just to name a few. To learn more on what UCY can offer and how you can be a part of UCY.TV, simply email us at contact.ucytv@gmail.com. That's contact.ucytv@gmail.com.